All right. We'll go ahead just because I know time is valuable for you guys. We'll go ahead and get started and we'll just kind of let other folks pop in and trickle in as we go. But thank you for joining our webinar today. The title of today's webinar is called Bridging the Gap, and we're really looking at how to identify and address performance gaps through effective training. So making sure that you guys have got your teams where they need to be, and starting that process can be quite a challenge. Just to answer some of those questions, I see some of you guys have some AI recording assistance. We also will be recording the webinar, and so we'll have it available on demand, and we'll have some other resources that we'll actually go through today that will be available as a PDF that will get sent later as well. Let's see here. So we'll go ahead and let's dive right in. We've still got some folks popping in here. All right, so just a little bit about us and what we bring to the field. So iVet360, our mission is to educate and help hospitals implement innovative and sustainable operational best practices. I know that's a mouthful, but what it really means is we just do everything we possibly can to assist our hospitals making their practice as successful as can be. We specialize in some comprehensive support in a few different areas. We look at analytics and finance. So here we offer some real-time data analytics and financial services, including bookkeeping, to help you track and succeed business goals. We also have our HR and team support, which is our team here that's putting on this webinar. We have experienced HR advisors that assist with things like recruiting, training, retaining staff, and really just making sure your team's operating smoothly and efficiently. Our marketing suite works on developing and implementing effective marketing strategies to help attract new clients, retain existing clients, and really just enhance your hospital's growth and reputation in your area. Our overall mission is really just to educate and help hospitals implement those really good operational best practices to help you guys focus on what you do best, caring for those patients. So you'll also probably see here Rosie and Tamisha. Rosie's going to be moderating today's webinar. Those are my counterparts here at the HR and team support department at iVet360. And Rosie will be keeping an eye on the chat. So if you guys have questions or if you're having technical difficulties, we'll do our best to help you get through it from there. Okay, a little bit about me. So I've been in the field, lifelong industry professional. It's literally been a life now. I've been in the field for, gosh, I want to say about 18 years and worked my way into a management role shortly after joining the field. So probably about a decade and a half in leadership. I've managed a pretty wide variety of practice types, ranging from tiny little 1-doctor practice to a big 9-doctor general practice, and even a really busy emergency practice. We've also, I just really place a high priority on ensuring practices are delivering top-notch medical quality through a team of empowered, capable, and engaged employees, and have really skilled, knowledgeable, and effective hospital leaders, because that position can really make or break your team and your hospital success. Since I joined iVet360, I have the huge pleasure of working with a really wide variety of practice owners, practice managers. Sometimes I'm even working with practice leads, and we're working on initiatives that drive that overall success. So things like developing structure, supporting leaders through challenging HR situations that pop up here and there, because we all know those happen quite regularly, unfortunately. I like to say I've seen it all, but I still get surprised. And as you all know about this field, there's always something new to learn. 18 years in, and there's still things that are just surprising me day in, day out. I'm super passionate about, like I said, that quality of medicine through employee training, development, and retention. So kind of just a shoe-in for this, this webinar here. I also just highlight it's really important to have a fun work environment. I love helping practices really rekindle that love for the field and just like enjoying being at work every day. Who wants to work 40 hours a week and just be a grump or a curmudgeon all the time? So let's make sure we keep our folks happy. In my air quote spare time, I wrangle a house literally overflowing with energy. I've got 5 kids, 6 dogs, 5 goats, and now a cat, proud cat owner as well. So who knows what'll show up at the front gate tomorrow, but I'll probably take it if it does, because I can't help myself. Okay, so a little bit about what we're going to be digging into today. Really, we're going to focus on identifying performance gaps in veterinary teams. So what do those look like? Really exploring some tools and techniques and resources to analyze those gaps, and then discuss some strategies for training and team development, which is kind of the closing of those gaps. The topic is important and it's critical because the impact of skilled and cohesive teams on things like patient care, client satisfaction, and practice profitability can make or break the success of your practice. So I hope you guys get a lot out of this, and I hope we have some fun today. Okay, so kind of just to reinforce, why is it important? Increased quality of patient care. Having those experienced and capable hands assisting and managing patient care positively impacts patient outcomes and productivity. Clients will consistently have a positive experience and feel confident and comfortable leaving their precious fur babies in your team's hands. And that consistency is important. We want to deliver that optimal client experience all of the time across any team of employees that you've got working that day or time. Doctor trust really means more delegation and optimal tech utilization, which is kind of a twofold benefit. You'll get some increased productivity with doctor delegation, but you'll also get a boost in staff engagement. JAVMA actually did a survey, I want to say it was in the last couple of years, but what they found was that almost 60% of staff said they were sometimes or frequently asked to perform tasks that a lower level person could do. And 57% said that there are medical tasks they were qualified or trained to do, but sometimes or frequently not asked to perform by their supervisor. And so that's really just optimizing that tech utilization and making sure we're allowing our staff to work to the maximum capacity of their license and also their skill set. But that definitely is driven through doctor trust. That has to be the first step. So let's kind of get into the identifying of performance gaps. First, you really need to know what is a performance gap. The actual definition is the difference between the expected and actual performance. And this can be based on knowledge base, skill set, proficiency. There's different types of skill gaps, or different types of gaps. So there's skill gaps, there's knowledge gaps, and there's behavioral gaps. Today, we're really going to focus more on those first two, skill and knowledge gaps, but we'll briefly touch on behavioral gaps so that you know what they are and how to tackle them. It's important to note that skill and knowledge gaps are in a very different category than staff growth and development. We're really kind of just building that foundation where you can continue staff growth and development once you've reached that base minimum level of expectation as far as their performance and skill set goes. Okay, what are some common causes for these gaps that we see? Lack of clarity in roles and responsibilities. That's a really big one. Having job descriptions that help outline expectations and having accountability to support and reinforce those expectations is imperative. This doesn't always mean manager. This can mean peer accountability, self-accountability, but that manager or leader also needs to make sure that team's held accountable for those standards and expectations and addressing whenever those things deviate. Insufficient training or non-existent new hire training and onboarding. This is also a big one. We had a really big mass exodus of experience and tenure in the field over the last 5 years, thanks COVID. So we're kind of left with this revolving door of inexperienced and inadequately trained employees, and sometimes this really tiny core group of exhausted tenured staff. So over time, what we see with that revolving door, staff in, staff out, we're investing time, we're investing energy. Our existing staff gets less engaged in training. They're less invested in the development of new staff and the process, and they become burnt out themselves, leading to more turnover, which is kind of a vicious cycle. In some gaps, we're left with new inadequately trained staff training new staff, which is kind of like that telephone game. It's a recipe for disaster. Some other things that we see that drive this: poor communication and workflow inefficiencies. This can be really difficult to identify if you don't have some consistency and uniformity as far as staff training and knowledge bases go. So sometimes you'll see this will come out and you'll start to highlight these things once you've identified and closed some of these performance gaps. Team dynamics and culture issues can also drive performance and skill gaps. Like I said before, right? If we've got staff that's really disengaged and they're investing less, we're going to get less training and less consistency, and that knowledge isn't passing hands from tenured to new staff. This is a driver of gaps, but it's also driven by the gaps. So there's kind of a cyclical relationship with that culture and the team dynamic when we see this kind of chronic turnover and this poor skill set for some of our new hires coming out of training. Let's talk a little bit about how this can impact your team. Kind of back to this, why is it important? Really want to drill that in. You'll see decreased team morale and productivity. This perpetuates that vicious cycle I mentioned, right? That revolving door of new staff, meaning if we don't course correct, it can and absolutely will get worse. Increased turnover and recruitment challenges. Growing and developing new staff is a lot of work. It's rewarding work, absolutely, but requires a huge investment, and you have to be really intentional with your time. A successful and engaging onboarding process is a direct driver of employee retention, especially in that first year. You also may see some negative client and patient outcomes, which can directly impact your business and goes against sometimes the very mission and vision you have for your practice. The bottom line, a well-trained veterinary team is beneficial for your hospital. It's good for your patients. It's good for your clients, and it's good for the employees, not to mention the load of stress it takes off you as the leader of the practice. Okay, so we kind of know a little bit about why these gaps are important, and we've kind of identified what they are as far as a definition goes, but let's talk about what got us here. Where did we go wrong, right? So the hiring and selection process, some of the things that we want to look at here, are you attracting the top talent in the field? This might look like really good benefits, compensation structures and models that are really competitive. Do you have the right culture to attract the top talent in the field and retain the best candidates? The other thing that's part of that hiring and selection process is the screening process. So is that selection and screening process really designed to make good quality hires with the right knowledge, skill set, and attributes to be an awesome add to your team? And now knowing that we are losing a lot of skilled, experienced employees in the field, and sometimes bringing in those folks that are really green to the field, that knowledge and skill set might go by the wayside, and you might be looking at some of those staff members that just you're really focusing on the attributes that will make them a really positive, good add to your team. So it's not always all three of those things, but definitely if you can find them, let's make sure we're getting the right candidates through the door. New hire training and onboarding, like I said before, within that first year, new hire retention is strongly correlated to having a positive, thorough onboarding process. So we need to ask questions like, does new hire training exist? Which is question number one. If it does exist, right, what does that structure look like? Is it clear? Is it user-friendly? Are our teams using it consistently and updating it regularly to make sure it's aligned with like new policies or procedures or updates in medical practices that are like the best practices? The other piece of new hire training is having those mentors and trainers be the right people in that role. A lot of time what we see here is the most functionally skilled employees end up here, but we can delegate the teaching of tasks to those highly skilled employees. What we need to look for from a good mentor, they've got to be patient, they've got to be thorough, they do need to be knowledgeable enough in their respective areas of expertise, but have the knowledge to know how to use resources, to find answers and delegate skills that they haven't mastered. But they also really need to have very, very good time management skills and awesome follow-through skills. That follow-through tends to be a really big gap. So consistent, regular check-ins with those new hires, making sure that those performance and skill gaps aren't starting to show up and growing for lack of follow-through. We have that old sink or swim mentality, which it's old, it's outdated. I still see it way too often. And while some employees really thrive in this environment, a lot of employees that could be really great, successful ads tend to fail or move on to the next opportunity if we don't give them that structure and support they need to learn and grow and ultimately be successful in their role. So what now? Let's close the gap. That's why we're all here, right? We know what the gap is. We've kind of identified how we got here, but what do we need to do to make some progress here? There's there's three components that we really need to successfully identify and resolve these gaps. Number one, we've got to know where we're starting. It's really hard to create goals if we don't have a baseline and know how our current state deviates from the ideal state or a future goal state. We also need to take the time, this number two, make some individualized development plans. There are some circumstances that allow for more team-wide development plans, and we can absolutely incorporate those. But a lot of times our employees are operating on very different playing fields from one another, and they need a little bit more individual and personalized support, which kind of means we have to invest that time. And then number three, once we've closed the gap, we need to make sure that we have sustainable success, consistent training plans, feedback loops in place so that we don't have to repeat this process. It's a lengthy process, it's a huge investment, and it's something that you don't want to find yourself doing again 2 years down the road. So let's talk a little bit about where we are now. So this first step of this process is what we call a gap analysis, which is also known as maybe a skills assessment. You might have heard it referred to. Step one, we need to make sure our employees have clear expectations. So job descriptions that are up to date and accurate for the role that they're in. Really asking, do they know what they are supposed to do day to day, week to week, month to month? The next step of that is, do they have the skills and training to complete their job? So this is an opportunity to have our employees self-assess. I recommend creating this self-assessment based on something like a job description. If you already have an existing new hire training, maybe even based on a performance evaluation. It might look something like the example you see here on the slide, where you've got a task and a skill set, maybe a rating from 0 to 5, maybe a rating from skilled or unskilled to skilled, and an opportunity for comments as well is always nice. So what you'll do is have your employees identify their own skill sets and figure out where they fit in this range of things. Sometimes it's even just making sure they understand the goal of the exercise. It gets them in the right mindset to consider that growth, learning, and really makes them self-aware. So this makes your work a little bit easier as you start to navigate some of these conversations. So what I usually do is something like this with the example we've got here. Maybe you're having them rate it by number. You could even have a job description that doesn't have a rating system and just give them maybe like a red, yellow, and green highlighter, right? Where, hey, in red, highlight things that you have zero confidence or exposure and you absolutely need more training in. Maybe yellow is where they feel somewhat confident, but not super confident and definitely not ready to train others or new hires. And then green, those are the areas they feel really capable, confident, and able to teach someone. So this could look very different from hospital to hospital, but those are just some ideas. Like I said, base it on a training checklist, training guide, performance evaluation. Ideally, you kind of want this cycle of employee knowledge and skills to follow a uniform pattern. So they should be trained to know and do the things based on their job description, and then they should be evaluated on those same criteria. And that gap analysis or skill assessment is no different, should follow that same pattern and follow those same skill sets. We don't want any surprises here. So let's talk about the next step. So we've had our staff kind of assess themselves. We know what they're supposed to do. We've got some clear expectations and that guiding beacon. The manager or mentor assessments. These are things that you want to have your managers complete, but they have to have the right tools to do so. So some of the things that your managers or mentors might need as a precursor to this, tips and training for structured observation. So maybe they're getting some skill sets and developing some skill sets for observation and giving feedback, how to gather constructive feedback and also how to give constructive feedback. You might utilize some tools for performance assessment. So things like one-on-one meetings or check-ins, maybe there's some structure you can build there. Those employee self-assessments will absolutely be a tool. Maybe you're using some 360-degree feedback processes. That's where peers are assessing each other, or maybe your staff is assessing a manager's skill set or a doctor's skill set. And there's a couple different anonymous platforms you could utilize for something like that. You'll also want to make sure you've identified some key metrics, KPIs, right? Those key performance indicators, something like appointment efficiency or client wait times, revenue per veterinarian or technician. Maybe you're looking at call conversion or client retention rates. These things will vary depending on the role of the person that you're really focusing on in these situations. And ultimately through this process, like you and your mentors and trainers will be diagnosing some root causes, separating skill issues from motivation issues from system-related problems. So we're really looking at using data to identify patterns and trends and asking ourselves, is this gap truly an employee gap, or do we have some bigger picture solutions that we need to work on first? Based on these assessments, you'll come away with some goals, hopefully, right? So you'll have your meeting and the conversation looks different from employee to employee, but really here's how you can set yourself up for success. Do your homework, know your job description, know your employee's primary role, make sure that's taken into consideration. When you're having this conversation, you'll also have, hopefully, your self-assessment from your employee and your manager assessment that you've completed based on that same criteria. So in your meeting, you're maybe recognizing some positives. Don't skip this piece. That positive feedback is super important. So areas where your employee is doing great, or areas where you feel like they're doing great, maybe even better than they feel like they're doing themselves. That's the next step, looking at those areas where you disagree. This might mean that gap is, hey, you're more skillful than you think you are, but sometimes it also might mean where they're less skilled than they feel they are. And that's where that skillful feedback giving is necessary. So making sure we've got all the tools in the toolbox to give that feedback in a way that is positive and constructive. And then you also might be considering feedback from 360 reviews, or that you've heard through check-ins with other doctors, other staff members, maybe some big picture things that you've heard during team meetings as well. So really setting yourself up for success just in general, kind of big picture, right? You really want to create a learning culture in your hospital. So fostering that growth mindset across the entire team. And this might mean celebrating small wins and improvements, whether those are individual or for the entire team, just really making sure that that feedback is encouraged and frequent. Then you'll be creating, like I said, those tailored training plans and development plans. You'll want to have role-specific training. So when I say new hire training guides, that doesn't mean just one big new hire training guide for every employee that walks in the door. You want to make sure you've got something for the front desk staff, something for your veterinary assistants, something for your new associate doctors, something for kennel staff. There might be some overlapping areas where you can save yourself some work, but there are definitely some role-specific things that need to be built in. Really building those soft skills too, communication, empathy, teamwork. Those are kind of those untangible soft skills that you want to incorporate and encourage and foster and give positive feedback about. And then you'll focus obviously on technical skill development. So you can incorporate things like wet labs, hands-on training. Maybe there's some CE programs or some online learning resources that you can utilize. You also want to ensure that mentorship and cross-training initiatives are successful. Not every hospital cross-trains. I do think a cross-trained employee is worth their weight in gold. It's a really great practice, but making sure that that mentorship piece is there too. Pairing new hires with experienced team members who have the right mindset and are doing things the right way the first time around. Sometimes rotating those roles can build some versatility and reduce burnout, hence the cross-training. This makes it a little bit easier to navigate on a day-to-day basis too for a hospital manager. And then you want to really commit to that follow-through. That follow-through piece is the big miss that we see a lot. Commit to that follow-through, set those SMART goals for each team member. We will look at some SMART goals on the next slide. So if you're questioning what a SMART goal is, it's okay, we've got you covered. And then just make sure that that feedback is ongoing and actionable. That feedback and follow-through is a really, really important piece that's often missed with some of these initiatives. So let's talk a little bit about SMART goals. So building these individualized plans, you really want to make sure that you're using some form of structure to make meaningful, useful goals. So each individual will have their own training and development plan. And this should be collaborative. You want your employees actively engaged in this process. The planning, the implementation, the follow-through, this should all be very interactive. And you can use this same process to tackle those hospital-wide gaps that we mentioned earlier. Just might require a little bit of tweaking. So setting SMART goals, let's talk a little bit about exactly what a SMART goal is. The S, right, specific. This is a goal that is well-defined and clear. It should answer common questions like what and how, and maybe provide a clear sense of direction. The M is measurable. You should have some form of progress tracking via a measurable metric or indicator. This makes it easier to determine when you've achieved it or when you've made progress. So something like unskilled, competent, highly skilled, maybe a rating of 0 to 5, or maybe there's some KPIs that you're looking at. Like I said, that client call conversion or appointment time efficiency. Achievable. These goals should be realistic and within reach, even if they create some challenges. Overly ambitious or unrealistic goals can result in frustration, decreased motivation when there's lack of progress or success, and that can be really demotivating. R is for relevant. They should align with the overall objective of their role in the practice. It should be related to things they're doing like in the day-to-day context of their impact on the practice's function. So you don't necessarily need, your brand new receptionist working on a SMART goal that's related to placing NG tubes or intubating patients. We want to make sure that it's something tangible that they will use on a day-to-day basis. Time bound. There should be a specific time frame or deadline that specifies when you want this goal achieved. This helps you with time management and makes it easier to monitor progress over time, but it also helps relay a sense of urgency. This isn't a SMART goal to develop over the next 5 years. These are some things that we're looking at 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, maybe at the most 12 months down the road. So to kind of give you an example, we'll kind of walk through this example that I created here. Specific, learn, so this is for a veterinary assistant or veterinary technician. Learn and demonstrate the correct technique for placing an IV catheter in both canine and feline patients, including preparation, placement, and securing of the catheter. Measurable, we just created some measures here. Successfully place at least 5 catheters under supervision with a success rate of 80% or higher by the end of the training period. Achievable. That's realistic and achievable, absolutely. We're maybe going to give them some resources to do that. We've got some hands-on training sessions with a senior technician. Maybe you've got some models you can utilize. Maybe there are some observations of catheter placements during procedures. Maybe you've got resources like some online learning platforms that have some really great videos. Give them the tools they need to make this goal achievable. Relevance, mastering IV catheter placement is essential for assisting with treatments, fluid therapy, emergency care, and improves patient outcomes and efficiency in the hospital. So as far as time bound, we're going to say let's achieve this proficiency in IV catheter placement within 4 weeks with a progress review by February 9th, 2025, which is not 4 weeks away, but the date is negligible here. So just kind of to give you an example, that's what a SMART goal might look like for someone like an assistant or a technician in our field. So your role as the manager and leader in this process, facilitate the process. Data from our 2024 Practice Managers Report that we released emphasizes the importance of investing in your team's growth and development. And I think while training is recognized as a top priority, only 32% of practice managers' time was spent working on development. That disconnect presents an opportunity for practices to improve staff retention by allocating some more time and dedication and resources to that comprehensive training program. Addressing the challenge of training support staff, which was cited by nearly half of managers that we surveyed, can lead to improved competency, job satisfaction, and ultimately better retention rates. With 48% of managers citing team performance as a major challenge and 53% looking for help with employee accountability and management, there's obviously a need for some improved strategies and tools in this area outside of just dedicating that time and making sure you commit to the time and space. So facilitate the process. Make sure there's time and space for the necessary conversations to happen. Build those resources, have everything at the ready so that you can really make sure that this movement builds momentum. Some of these conversations might be delegated to like a lead technician or a lead receptionist at some point, but you really have to ensure that those folks have the same big picture goals and that they have the right skills to help your employees thrive. The last thing you want to do is get this massive project rolling and have it fizzle out because it was delegated to people who weren't quite ready for that responsibility and role. And then make sure your team has the tools and resources they need to be successful. Like I said, that's things like time is obviously number one, mentors or the right people to learn from. Maybe it's an online learning platform. Maybe it's some textbooks. Maybe it's those wet labs or training opportunities. And then making sure that we're providing support and following up to evaluate progress. That is a continuous process, and this is where the biggest miss is, right? The other two pieces are a little bit more task-based, but this follow-up is where you'll spend most of your time, and it's where a lot of times these initiatives tend to fall off, simply because we get busy, right? Things happen. It's a hospital. It gets wild and crazy sometimes. Okay, so let's take a look at the process, right? I say facilitate the process. Well, what exactly is the process? We will also, so these next couple slides we'll have as a PDF for you guys available at the end of the webinar. So don't worry about madly scribbling down all these notes because it's going to be a lot. So step number one, identify those clear objectives, right? We talked about defining what success looks like for each role. So some of those action items for you as the leader, reviewing job descriptions and performance expectations for all team members, identifying key skills, behaviors, and outcomes needed to be successful. And then your outcome here is really just setting that clear benchmark for assessing current team performance. You have to have a bar if you're going to assess how everybody measures up to it. Step two, observe and assess team performance. So this is really just kind of a simple performance audit. So some of the things that you might do, and this also can be delegated potentially depending on your department lead situation, spend a couple days observing team members during daily operations. Follow a patient, start to finish, check in to check out. What does that workflow look like? Maybe you've got a checklist to help you keep some notes of where individuals excel and struggle in that process. Things like communication, technical skills, client interactions. And then looking at some of those metrics and trends, things like appointment efficiency, compliance with protocols. Maybe you're looking at client satisfaction or call conversion rates. There are some tangibles that you can tie to some of these things. And what you're really looking for is a list of observed strengths and areas for opportunities. But doesn't hurt to note some of the positives there. Maybe there's some wins. Maybe there's some areas where employees are really excelling. Make sure to take note of that too. So step three is gathering feedback. This is really kind of broadening the perspective. So we're looking at self-assessments, we're looking at manager assessments, but what do things look like from a peer perspective or from a client perspective? So this would be things like maybe scheduling some one-on-one check-ins with each team member, asking some open-ended questions. What challenges are you facing in your current role? What training or tools might help you succeed better? What do you enjoy most about your work? Some of those more standard stay interview questions, but definitely more targeted towards training, skill sets, development, those kinds of things. And then that self-assessment form that your staff's going to be filling out. If it's applicable, depending on what your goal is or what you're looking at or targeting, you might also collect feedback from clients and peers. We talked about those 360 reviews earlier. Maybe you've got a client survey feedback. Maybe you're collecting in the moment client feedback after you've watched a patient go through the workflow from check-in to check-out. But the goal is really to just come out of this with some insights into perceived performance gaps, but also actual performance gaps based on multiple different perspectives. Okay, so once we've gotten some feedback, the next step is identifying those root causes. And this is analyzing all of the feedback, all of the data, all of the things that you've collected up into this point to pinpoint the sources of those gaps. So you'll be reviewing observations, maybe looking at some of those feedback, really identifying if we've got a skill deficiency. So like maybe there's a need for more hands-on training or CE or wet labs. Process inefficiencies, so that might look like an unclear workflow or some bottlenecks that you've identified in your observations. Behavioral challenges would be things like poor teamwork, poor communication skills, maybe just a negative attitude altogether. And you're really separating those individual issues from your systemic ones. So is it a training gap? Are we understaffed? Do we have a workflow issue? And the goal is to come out of that with a prioritized list of gaps with some root causes. Step 5 is creating the plan. So develop your training plan. This is where we talked about those tailored development initiatives and plans. So you're choosing maybe 1 to 2 key areas to focus on initially. For skill gaps, sorry, I didn't mean to pop forward there. For skill gaps, you'd be looking at things like enrolling team members in CE or workshops or scheduling some in-house training sessions. So leverage those lunch and learns, use those reps that want to come in and spout off about their products, great, but let's do that with a training opportunity tied to it. For workflow issues, this could be something like updating and clarifying your SOPs, having some team meetings to talk through them, training staff on new or updated processes, with step-by-step guides, or maybe some hands-on training. For behavioral gaps, this would look more like coaching and mentorship opportunities. Maybe you're building in some team building activities, and maybe there's some opportunity to create some initiatives to work on communication, because those can be big gaps too. But most often what I see is those skill and knowledge gaps, and some of those other things will get fixed through a cascade. The outcome here is just a simple, actionable plan with some specific goals and guidelines so you can move forward. And then this step 6, right? This is that one we talked about that gets missed on far too often. Monitor the progress, track the improvements, provide the feedback. So you've set some SMART goals for each individual, checking in regularly to assess their progress and course correct. Just because we set a SMART goal doesn't mean it has to look exactly the same start to finish. We may need to shift gears a little bit. We may find some new opportunities based on these training opportunities that we've identified. Really making sure that these conversations are happening. And like I said before, they absolutely can be delegated, but you have to make sure they're delegated to the right people. And you also need to make sure you stay in the loop and have those regular updates. So that might look like a meeting between your lead technician and a technician in training, and then your meeting with your lead technician to kind of get the rundown and the basics and make sure that you stay in the loop. Using performance metrics to measure success, like did we see reduced client complaints? Did we see increased call conversions? Did our appointment wait time significantly decrease? And then bringing yourself out of this with some clear evidence of progress and maybe some areas requiring additional focus. But hey, if you've checked all the boxes and everything's looking great, time to put that one away and move on to the next objective. We only started with 1 or 2 because we're taking this in bite-sized chunks. You don't want to give an employee their whole job description and say, hey, work on all of these 50 things and let's meet again in a month. That can be a lot to process. So let's make sure we're taking it in bite-sized chunks. And then step 7, this is just kind of rolling you into that more long-term sustainable success, building that continuous culture of learning where development just becomes a daily part of your operation. So this would be things like more regular training sessions, workshops, maybe some peer-to-peer learning through mentorship or cross-training, and then really, really making sure that we're recognizing and rewarding those improvements. Whether it's a shout out in a team meeting, maybe you have like a kudos jar or a positive thought jar, but maybe there's some small incentive or reward, but there has to be some feedback loop that provides that positive feedback. And the outcome here is really just, we want to have a motivated team committed to ongoing growth. This creates a really great space for your existing staff to learn and grow, but also is a wonderful place for a new hire to come into. That culture where the entire team is going to be part of their learning process and part of their development. And that sets your new hires up for success in the future too. So let's look at being successful and what those things look like for you guys. So we talked about starting small, focus on 1 or 2 gaps at a time. Don't overwhelm yourself, don't overwhelm your team. Communicate openly, explain the purpose and the benefits of these assessments, and really focus on getting team buy-in. And recognizing those rewards is a huge part of gaining team buy-in throughout the process. Leverage your resources, free low-cost training tools, webinars, online courses, maybe there's some industry associations. Really seize those CE opportunities as they come your way where you can get your entire team involved. And stay flexible. We have to be prepared to adapt based on feedback, results, progress, lack of progress. These training plans are all interactive and they all shift gears depending on the time of day sometimes. So just make sure you're ready to adapt and be flexible with your staff. This is really what kind of where I get the opportunity to plug our services. So this is your opportunity to get some outside support, right? So here at iVet360, that's the heart of what we do. We help practices identify and tackle performance gaps so their teams can thrive, whether it's figuring out where to start or creating a plan to get there, or even just creating the resources that you need in order to start this process. Our job, we're here. We support practice managers and owners every step of the way. So if you guys are curious about how we can help your practice, check out our website, send us an email. All of those resources will be available at the end of the webinar for you to see pretty easily, or just general Q&A. You'll have that access to. Quick checklist for getting started. So here's some of the things that if today is day 1 for you, you want to make sure you have handy and ready to go. Review your job descriptions and expectations. This might also mean create job descriptions and expectations, and that's okay. Step 1. Observe team members and document findings. Carve out some time for yourself. 1 or 2 days, different shifts, different teams. Make sure you're getting big picture. What does it look like on a day-to-day? Where are we successful? Where are we not successful? And you can also gain that individual feedback in those situations as well. And then collect feedback from staff directly through one-on-one meetings and self-assessments. You've got to have that structure built in there, so you really need to make sure your job descriptions and expectations are there. Analyze those findings to really identify root causes and find some performance gaps. And then you're developing those role-specific training plans for your staff, setting some measurable goals, monitoring the progress, which really just rolls you into that culture of continuous improvement and recognition and support. A lot of the tools and processes used here can be used for more long-term development once you've reached that stage, but kind of here and now, it's a little bit more, I say short-term, but 6 months, maybe 12 months at the most, as you're getting your staff to that foundational point where you want them to be. So we've closed the gap. So now what? This isn't like flash forward maybe 12 months, right? We've closed some of those gaps. So ideally, at this point, all existing staff are trained to a minimum standard. This is that foundation. And this is also throughout the last 12 months that we just flash forwarded. You may have to advocate and help your doctors remember that while the knowledge and skills are there, and you've worked really hard to get them there, there is a lot to learn in this field. And simply put, regardless of how great the training is, no tech at 1-year tenure is going to operate like a tech with 15 years experience, just plain and simple. There does need to be that level of understanding and patience so that everyone can have that positive role in the continued growth and learning of staff, old and new alike. But sometimes we just got to bring everybody back to earth a little bit. The next phase from here is building proficiency and efficiency. And this is the thing that takes time. So we've embedded that continuous learning and continuous improvement into the culture of the hospital. We've really encouraged open communication, and we're always asking the team for ideas to improve workflows and patient care or client care, and ensure that the learning doesn't stop there. Just make sure they have that continuous access to learning resources, give them whatever they need. And so, hey, like, great, you've demonstrated you can place a catheter. but you know the steps, you know the materials, you know how to do it. You've maybe done it successfully a handful of times, but we just need to repeat, right? Repeat ad nauseum. This is this thing that takes time and opportunities to practice these new skills and this new knowledge. And if you have 10 employees that want to develop catheter placement skills, and maybe you're only placing 2 or 3 catheters a day, those opportunities can be few and far between. So that developing of proficiency can take some time. But along that way, recognize and reward the progress, celebrate those small wins, make sure the team achievements are recognized during team meetings or huddles. Maybe you're sharing success stories about how efforts or improvements positively impact clients or patients, or opportunities where you saw some really great teamwork associated with some of the things that you're working on. And this phase is really where you get to see return on investment. What return? Great, I have an answer for that. Boost in employee morale. It feels good to feel confident and skilled and have those skills recognized and used. This takes us back to that tech utilization, building engagement, using our techs and assistants to the maximum capacity, helping that doctor trust get built so they can delegate things. You see that boost in productivity, right? The more doctors trust their techs and assistants to do, and the more that they trust their receptionists to communicate clearly, the more they can delegate, thus freeing them up to do what I like to call doctor things, like generate more revenue, all ultimately without compromising patient care, of course. So the atmosphere here is also the perfect climate where you can start to identify and recognize developing leadership skills for some of those employees that are ready for the next step. I think succession planning is a huge opportunity in the field, and it definitely requires some intensive focus in nurturing in those early stages, but it can be really difficult to identify those if you're battling basic skill and knowledge gaps. So it really sets you up for success, just building all those mini leaders that can help take things off your plate in the future. So building sustainable success. This really all of these things wrap up into what does this look like tomorrow and the next year and the next 3 years and the next 5 years. So we're making sure that our newly hired employees have everything they need to achieve that long-term success, because we want to keep them. We don't want them to turn over after a year. Where are they going to be? Here, and here's how we do that. Training, consistent, thorough, and completed in a very timely manner. We shouldn't see Wanda, hired in 2003, still working on that new hire packet. We also need to make sure we stay informed, right? Industry trends change, new best practices emerge, making sure that those new hire packets are up to date. We also shouldn't see Sally hired in 2025 working on an exact duplicate of Wanda's 2003 new hire training packet. So that thing changes and evolves over time. So make sure you're collecting feedback, keeping that process interactive, updating those training packets. We talked a lot about mentorship, making sure you've got the right people in that role, identifying and developing qualities and potential mentors, building that foundation and getting to that place where everybody's skill set is at least at that foundational minimum helps you identify some of those potential mentors that you can continue to develop in the future, and really fostering that environment that supports learning and growth and makes sure that the whole team can get involved. Progress evaluations. I probably sound like a record on repeat, but progress evaluations, make sure they happen super often early on. They'll probably taper off as the new hire is kind of integrated and better trained over time into a more normal evaluation structure once their training's completed. I also don't forget to work in those stay interview questions. The HR in me won't let me ignore that bit. Make sure that you're not only assessing training and skills, but are they thriving emotionally and adjusting and integrating successfully? Even with the most well-rounded teams, this can be a really hard field to break into. And add to that those skill and knowledge gaps, it can be a really stressful time for our new hires. Once we're kind of shifted out of that new hire phase, making sure we've got some annual or semi-annual reviews to identify new gaps or areas of improvement, or celebrate areas that they've been really great or excelled or closed some gaps. Keeping track of those key metrics, efficiency, client retention, maybe some of those other KPIs we talked about, and then continuing to be adaptable, flexible, responsive to new challenges, or practice growth, because practice growth almost always comes with growing pains. There's no escaping it, but really coaching and encouraging your team to be flexible and adaptable, and being flexible and adaptable yourself will help make those growing pains a little bit less painful, so to speak. So that's kind of setting up your new hires for long-term success, but what about all of the existing staff that we worked so dang hard to get here? Well, we talked about clear expectations. If you don't have them already, as part of this process was kind of making sure we've identified clear expectations. So those job descriptions, they should always be reviewed. They should always be signed upon employment or promotion, right? If you're developing a new lead or you're cross-training and moving a receptionist to an assistant or technician, let's make sure they know what that new job looks like. And then performance management. This could look very different hospital to hospital, and it is a time-consuming process, but you'll definitely reap the benefits. And I will say this investment tapers the longer you can retain your employees. So what does that schedule really look like? It could be monthly, right? On a monthly schedule, maybe you're doing some one-on-ones, some progress checks on development initiatives, building in an engagement pulse check. Doesn't have to be super formal, but just make sure you're taking the time to assess and check in with everybody once a month. Quarterly, maybe something that's a little bit more formal than your monthly one-on-one and probably less formal than your annual performance review. But this is really a little bit more focused on progress, needs, tools, and resources, right? So making sure that they've got everything they need to continue that development and growth. And you may even, depending on the tone of the team, right, you might even build some extra stay interview questions to those quarterlies. Annually, you're looking at a more formal performance evaluation, and this is where there shouldn't be any surprises, right? Because we've had opportunities to touch base on these things in our quarterly conversations, in our monthly conversations, maybe even in some one-offs in between. But you really don't want to get to this annual formal performance evaluation and have someone feel like they've been blindsided. And so we're really putting this focus on, through this process of performance evaluation, putting a focus on retention and engagement. So can we develop some leadership potential and offer growth paths for maybe top performers? Really reinforcing and reiterating the importance of teamwork. So you're continuing, in addition to these performance and management initiatives, maybe you're investing in some team building activities to really maintain morale and keep things moving. And continually throughout these conversations, in addition to your team meetings, your huddles, maybe there's some disciplinary processes sprinkled in, making sure that why stays in focus. Make sure the team remembers their shared purpose. We're here to deliver exceptional care to patients and clients. And that might look a little different based on your mission statement, or maybe you have a vision for your hospital, but just making sure that we're always kind of centering and refocusing our teams around that why in everything that we do. And so we talked a lot about like giving feedback, making sure we're successful about it, and why it's important. I think everyone's probably heard this before, love it or hate it. Feedback is a gift. It's true. And so what we really want to do is make sure that long-term success, we've got in positive and negative feedback loops established in the hospital. So what is a feedback loop? It's a continuous process where we've got observations, we've got feedback, we've got responses, and they're all cycling to continually drive improvement for a specific process or a specific initiative. This involves input from multiple sources. So your team members, your leadership, your clients, maybe your doctors, depending on what your feedback loop is related to. Some of the benefits to having some feedback loops when you're looking at performance gap assessment, you get some real-time insights. So you can identify gaps as they emerge, which reduces the risk of prolonged issues, right? Close it while it's small, because when it gets bigger, it's a bigger challenge for you. Improves communication. Feedback loops really foster an open and collaborative environment where feedback just becomes the norm. So, feedback is a gift. If you hate it, you probably don't get it often enough because it feels a little bit more normal and regular if it just becomes a common and consistent part of your conversations. Targeted solutions, pinpointing root causes and helping create specific actionable improvement plans to attack whatever specific thing it is that you're working on. You also see increased accountability. Feedback really encourages team members to take ownership of their performance. Nobody likes constructive criticism or negative feedback, but it is an absolute and necessary part of this process. So there's a couple of different steps to implementing some feedback loops. Step one, gather feedback regularly, making sure that you're having those scheduled one-on-ones, you're having regular team meetings. Maybe you've got some client surveys that you're putting out every once in a while. We talked before about tools like those self-assessments or 360-degree reviews. So some of these might be more frequent feedback loops, and some of these might be a little bit more prolonged with things like your annual reviews or 360-degree reviews. The next step is to analyze what you've collected and act. So you're looking for patterns or recurring themes in the feedback. If you've got 100 clients worth of feedback, you're not going to listen to one person, but you might listen to what the other 99 are saying. So really making sure that you're identifying those trends and taking that data into account. Then you can prioritize some actionable changes and communicate those plans to the team so you guys can move forward. And from there, it's just follow up and adjust, right? You're reassessing the progress after you've implemented some changes. What was successful? What was not successful? What do we need to change? Maybe we're collecting some additional feedback very specific to these scenarios to help us evaluate how effective these new processes or training initiatives really are. So let's talk about kind of a real-time example, feedback loop in action. So you've made an observation. Maybe you're recognizing that your receptionists are struggling with call conversion, which means converting client inquiries into appointments. You might have observed this through client conversion rates, doing call evaluations, or maybe just in the moment observation on a daily basis. So you also would want to get some feedback. So your receptionists have said that they feel unsure about their communication techniques and how to communicate and respond to in various situations. And this might be collected through some one-on-ones with receptionists or some department meetings, maybe very specifically targeted about call conversion and where the opportunity lies. Your action plan, so you've decided this is going to be a great step. Let's provide some call conversion scripts. How do we respond when our clients say this? How do we, what's our next step towards getting them closer to an appointment if they are just price shoppers, for example? So you might conduct some training, give them those tools and resources, and have some role play sessions where they can really practice those skills and get comfortable navigating those conversations. So you're providing them with resources, you're giving them time and space to develop that skill. And then great, everything's out, it's in action, let's move forward. The follow-up piece is very important. So we're going to track improvement in appointment conversion rates and revisit with our team to fine-tune the process. So even if we see positive uptick in conversion rates, doesn't mean we can just brush it under the rug and move on to the next thing. Follow up with your team. This validates their effort. It allows for new and different feedback to be presented, kind of just restarting the feedback loop, hence it being a loop, and reinforces the importance and value of their investment, which will make them a whole lot more likely to lean into future projects or feedback that you've got to give. Okay, so we're nearing the end here, guys. I know this is a lot of stuff to intake, so. All right, let's talk about tools. We've talked about 1,000,007 tools throughout this process, so let's kind of wrap it all up in one slide here. So we've got observation and monitoring tools. These are things like daily performance logs, tracking individual and team performance in real time. So that might be like either a Google sheet you're using or a tracker that you've created manually. Also, you can utilize workplace cameras or software, so you can monitor workflow and interactions. So that's using things like maybe you've got security footage and you're following on your camera a patient from check-in to check-out and assessing their wait times. Or you're doing some recorded call evaluations to assess for call conversion rates and the efficacy of some of those scripts that you put into play. There's also things like task management systems that are more task-based, but things like Trello or Asana or Monday, and that's really focusing on like those done in progress, not done tasks. And you can utilize that to observe and monitor success rates, completion rates, things like that. The next one's going to be those feedback collection tools. So there's a huge variety of resources and it's no one size fits all. So just make sure you've got the wide breadth before you make a decision what's going to work best for your team. Surveys and polls, you can use things like Google Forms, SurveyMonkey, or Office Vibe to get some anonymous feedback with some very specific questions or maybe even some broader, more open-ended questions. One-on-one meetings, really standardizing and developing some structure so that you have predefined questions about challenges and achievements. If there's something you want to know, you've got to ask the right questions to get that feedback. And then there's platforms that provide 360-degree evaluations. You can do those through like things like SurveyMonkey, but platforms like Lattice or LeapSum or Culture Amp, you can get that holistic input from peers and leaders based on a specific set of questions in anonymous fashion, which is really nice. You also are going to need to utilize some of those performance metric tools. So you might have like a client relation management system that's tracking client satisfaction, or a client survey that you put out that's tracking. Google reviews are useful, but they don't necessarily provide very specific feedback across a wide variety of clients. So you can also utilize your KPI dashboards, so looking at those key performance indicators. Analytics platforms like VetSuccess, iVet360 has a dashboard. You might even have an internal custom spreadsheet to measure some efficiency or appointment rates, or how many of our patients are compliant with heartworm prevention. Whatever your initiative might be, there is probably a KPI that you can utilize. And then benchmark reports. Those compare your team's performance to industry standards. Now take that with a grain of salt because industry standards means 1 doctor practice, 9 doctor practice, GP practice, ER practice, specialty. The whole gamut falls into this bucket. More importantly, you should benchmark your hospital against your hospital, especially if you're looking at progress and initiatives and making changes. Knowing where you started to where you are now is more important than knowing how you stack up against all the other average hospitals out there. So make sure you just got to know the data. Training and development tools. So these are things that would help support some of these development plans. You would utilize online learning platforms like CE courses, maybe through Vetfolio. Maybe you've got a VetGirl subscription. Maybe you're using @Dove is another one I hear pretty often, VetBloom. There's a whole bunch of them out there, but those would be more of those hands-on resources that provide more knowledge base for your team. In-house training materials. So this would be something more like a step-by-step guide, an SOP. Maybe you're doing some internal training or wet labs. Maybe you've got some training guides that support some of those processes in a similar way. Heck, maybe you have your own training videos, even better. Roll those in there. And then for training and development, you also might utilize some collaboration tools amongst your team. So this is just part of that communication piece. We're really looking to share resources and foster communication. So if I read a really great article about placing an IV catheter and the standard for how to properly aseptically scrub for that, right? If I read a really great article and I think my team would benefit, do I have a place to put that? Do I have a way to share what I know and think is important with the rest of my team? So that's a platform maybe like Slack or Microsoft Teams I see used pretty often. Google Chat's another one. Just making sure that they've got the opportunities to share knowledge and information with each other. And then documentation tools. So these would be things that you're using to keep track of more structural things. So employee development plans. This is where you would track your goals, progress, action steps. You might and should have a template for this, and it should probably be fairly confidential, so don't put it on like a shared drive. Make sure it's somewhere safe and sturdy, but keep track of those things, and keeping it written down helps you remember where did we start, where are we now, in maybe the 50 employees you have, making sure you remember this one specific conversation. There's also a lot of opportunities to use things like Google Drive or Dropbox for more digital file storage. I would say gone are the days of the old metal lockable file cabinet, but there are still some paper things that you will need to keep. So unfortunately, even as digital as you can be, you'll probably still have to have a file cabinet. But that's keeping those training materials and feedback records a little bit more organized so that you can be more successful with your time and more efficient. There's also things like HR software like Bamboo HR or Gusto. I mentioned Leapsome earlier that track employee performance and engagement. And so these are platforms that you can utilize over time to kind of give you some more tangible metrics and KPIs as far as performance and engagement for your staff go. I think it can be a lot. It can be very overwhelming. But I also say these are all areas that our HR and team support managers help problem solve, provide resources, and work through some of those solutions. So if you're one of our clients now and you've got a question, reach out. If you're not a client and you've got a question, feel free to reach out and we will absolutely get you in touch with someone who can help. Okay, case study. So let's see this performance management process and improvement process in action. So fast facts. We're looking at this case study is a hospital on the West Coast. They're kind of in that 1.5 to 3 million revenue band with 3 doctors, and they specialize in small animal, avian, and exotic. A little bit of background, when the hospital starts with IVET 360, over 70% of the practice's employees felt that their training program was not effective. And so excellent training programs are highly specific to individual hospitals, and we change them over time to account for those protocol changes, improvements in medicine, changes in employee learning styles. Even though this hospital already had a structured existing training plan, the biggest concern was implementing the plan and making sure that the employees were following it in a meaningful way. There was a checklist. It outlined phases, it had timeframes, and it had accountability for the plans, but there was not one specific person within the practice who was in charge of signing off on employees regarding their knowledge and skills. Routine check-ins were not being completed. Training grew inconsistent, especially since there wasn't really one standard to which everyone was measured. And so what we saw is new hires were taught multiple ways to perform a task. And because of that inconsistency, they were coming up with different results sometimes for the same task every time they performed it. Upon our analysis, we kind of recognized that while the training program doesn't always have to be completely reinvented, routine updates and evaluations help ensure that it's relevant and effective. And that consistency and accountability and leadership are paramount to a trainings program success. I don't know if I've said that enough times, but I figured I'd squeak one more out of the meeting today. So let's talk about what we did and what happened. So action. Our HR and team support manager here spoke with several people at the practice. They kind of went on a fact-finding mission. And after a lot of conversations and analysis, they narrowed down the root cause to trainers not being thoroughly educated on the tenets of proper employee training, right? We mentioned having the right people in the right roles for mentorship. So we created a plan to really tackle the challenge. We worked hard with their practice manager to get each of their leads appropriately up to date on how to execute those training plans. And then we demonstrated how to give effective feedback while knowing when to give that effective feedback. So there's the time, right place, and the right way to give it. After improving their training protocol, we reset the entire staff's training status to ensure that everyone was performing tasks at the same time to the same standards. Just like clean slate, let's start from scratch. We went through what's called the First Five process, which is an interactive training method that preaches teamwork and accountability. So we were really focused on let's reset, but let's make sure we don't lose some of these valuable tenets of teamwork and that the accountability is still there. So the results, right? After we went through this, we went through all of their training standards together, start to finish. We were able to realize that those processes needed updating. And so as all of the employees became aligned with the updated training, multiple team members became able to help a new hire get fully integrated. This freed up time for their training leads to focus on other important tasks. And because of that success, they were able to free up hospital management to use their valuable time during staff meetings to further enhance new and improved training and coaching courses, which ultimately paid off. So this practice, at the end of all of this, was able to successfully train a new technician in 8 weeks. Like I say successfully, right? Because that matters. Were they trained in 8 weeks or were they trained in 8 weeks? And that's the fastest they had ever done so before. And since their entire staff went through that process and the standards, they were all able to realize that those processes needed to be updated and everybody needed to be brought to the same level. So as they became aligned, like I said, it freed up time from leads, time for managers, kind of everybody benefited from restructuring and resetting, building that foundation. And this is a great place for them to build that proficiency. So that's just kind of seeing it in action. Let me pop open here. We have our next webinar is going to be Retention RX, keeping your team engaged and committed. So I just want to make sure I got this on here because our next slide is going to be our Q&A slide, and I know some of you might have to hop off with time, but keep your eyes peeled. That'll be coming out March 13th. Rosie's going to be putting that webinar on for us. It'll be at 11 Pacific and 2 p.m. Standard Time. And like I said, I know we went a little bit long on time, but if anybody wants to stick around, we've got some time for Q&A. Like I said, this webinar is recorded, so we'll have that as well with those performance management process resource. I've also got our website here, ivet360.com, if you want to learn more about our services. I've got our email here if you've got a question and we just weren't able to answer it today, or if you want to schedule an introduction and learn more about our services, please, please, please feel free to reach out. So with that, I know, like I said, we went a little bit over on time. So if you've got to pop off and get back to your business, go for it. But if you've got some time, you can stick around. We'll spend maybe 10 or 15 minutes doing some Q&A here too. So let me go ahead. I'm going to open this back up and we will get Rosie unmuted so she can help with that piece.
All right.
Okay. Are you there, Rosie?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can.
Perfect. Okay. So our first question is, what first steps do you typically recommend for practices who are looking to establish a more structured training and onboarding program for their new hires?
Yeah. So probably repeating myself again here, but I feel like I can't say it enough. Step one is just making sure you've got that guiding beacon. Do we have clear expectations and roles and responsibilities for each role in the hospital? So ultimately, you can't build your training checklist without knowing what you need what you need your staff to learn. So that structure really should follow through the full life cycle of an employee. They should be hired with a clear job expectation. So that's those job descriptions. If you don't have them, that's step one. And then train to build and develop skills and knowledge to complete that job. So if you don't have a training checklist, it should be based on your job description. If you don't have a job description, let's build that first. And then to take it a step further, that review and evaluation process should be based on those same criteria, at least as far as skills and knowledge go. You might build in some competencies based on more soft skills and communication type attributes that impact teamwork, but ultimately they should be hired for a job, trained to do that job, and then evaluated on that same criteria and skill set when it comes to skills and responsibilities. So it really depends. I guess it's a long way to say it just depends on where you are currently. What structure do you have, and can we leverage that? Or do we just need to start from scratch and build some job descriptions so that we can go from there?
Perfect. And then the next question is, how soon after implementing a training plan should you follow up to measure the impact and then also get feedback from your team?
Yeah, I don't think that there's any super concise, specific answer for that question. It's going to be hugely variable based on where your team is now and how quickly or how slowly they make progress, and sometimes even what progress you're evaluating. So for some things, like maybe it's call evaluations, immediate follow-up could be performed, right? So you gave them a skill set, you gave them some, did some role playing with some scripts and gave them some tools. You could perform call evaluations almost immediately to validate that they're using those skills you've helped them develop. Now, for that same example, looking at a metric like call conversion rate is probably a little bit more of like a weekly or maybe even monthly formal progress check as far as watching that needle move and that progress check for the percentage. But I think following up with the team based on any observations you make, whether that's through your direct observation or through call evaluations, should be as timely as possible. This will help you identify some additional barriers or maybe just make sure and validate you're on the right path to success. So you might be recognizing their success to validate and reward their hard work, or identifying opportunities so that you can switch gears. And the sooner the better. I don't say there's no too soon. I wouldn't hop out of a meeting and give someone feedback in the next 5 minutes, but but I think the more timely you can be with some of those things, the better. That's why feedback loops are really imperative for sustainable success. You just want to make sure you've got a plan for what feedback will be given, when and how, and once you embark on any progress change journey. So make sure you've got an idea of what that's going to look like before you even begin. But for some things, it could be tomorrow, next week, sometimes maybe even out a month. But if there's some behaviors and some direct things that should be in play, that can almost begin immediately.
And that looks like that's all the questions for now.
Okay, awesome. Well, like I said, feel free to pop us an email if you've got a question we didn't answer. If there's some in the chat that we didn't get to, we'll make sure we reach out to you guys. And we hope to see you in March at our next webinar. Thanks for coming and have a great rest of your day, everybody.